There's a song by Fleetwood Mac that has a line in it that says, "Too much Warhol hanging on the walls." Well, at our house, we don't think that that's a problem. We have several prints of Andy Warhol. This is the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth. And we have this picture of Jackie O by Andy Warhol, and also Marilyn Monroe. And we have a blank space on our wall, and we're waiting for our next print to come. And this is the portrait of Debbie Harry that we're waiting for to put on our wall next to those two other iconic ladies. Andy Warhol met Debbie Harry of Blondie when she was working as a waitress at Max's Kansas City on Park Avenue South, just north of Union Square. And he got her to come over to his factory studio in Union Square to photograph her, and then they chose out the best shot for that iconic portrait. Similarly, he met these four guys, or saw them play, the original members of the Velvet Underground, when they were playing a weird kind of residency at a weird kind of club called the Cafe Bazaar in Greenwich Village. And I'm not sure they were even getting paid, because their first paid gig that I have heard about was the following month, December of 1965. But after he discovered them, he put them together with the model from Germany, Nico, and then they started performing, and he started setting up gigs for them and helped produce their first album. But where it all began was at his first factory studio, which was on East 47th Street in Manhattan. And that's what we're going to show you next. From 1962 to 1967, this was the approximate location of the building where Andy Warhol's factory was located, on the 4th or 5th floor. And as you can see, there's no building like that now. It's replaced by a parking garage and a high-rise on 2nd Avenue. We're on 47th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues. And I actually know this block well. I used to belong to this Y. I'd come over here and go swimming nearly every day. And it's right across the street from a piece of New York's 1960s history. But that history has been obliterated. Nothing here to show, no plaque on the wall, nothing to indicate where Andy Warhol's first factory of 3 locations was located. This is Union Square, and there's a lot of things to do with the Velvet Underground and Andy Warhol and Lou Reed around Union Square. Now, this building used to be the Palladium Dance Club, and whatever it was before that was called something else. I'll post it down below. It was where Lou Reed recorded Rock and Roll Animal in the early 70s, a seminal album that reintroduced him to a lot of people who didn't know the Velvet Underground in the 60s, but knew Lou Reed in the 70s, and then did some retroactive learning about the Velvet Underground later on. I know I did. I knew Lou Reed before I knew of the Velvet Underground, but I didn't know them. And only since discovered they're one of the greatest rock and roll bands of all time. That's why I'm doing this video. But another place we're gonna go to, we've already shown where Max's Kansas City was, up on Park Avenue South, looking up this street just north of Union Square. And this is 14th Street, running along the south side of Union Square. But Andy Warhol had his second factory location over here, I believe on the west side of Union Square, and I'll find which building that was. It was the building where unfortunately he was shot. Fortunately not fatally, but it did affect his health long term and ultimately led to his premature demise. But let's find that building next. Okay, so this was his second location, Andy Warhol. His studio was on the 6th floor of 33 Union Square West. And the building is underneath a lot of scaffolding right now, right here towards the northwestern part of Union Square, where they have farmers markets almost continuously. But I don't mean to be morbid. It was from 68 to 73 that he had his studio here, and it was the first year that he moved in. In 68, he was shot while he was on the phone, so he must have been up in his studio. So the Decker building is totally enshrouded in scaffolding, but there's another nice building of the same vintage right on the corner of Union Square and 16th Street. So, and then he finally moved his studio to a third and final location somewhere up here on Broadway, just above Union Square. So we're like, what would you call this neighborhood? East Chelsea? I'm not sure. It's like Union Square. It's above 14th, so it's not the Village. But it's a nice stretch. And there's a store that's a real New York City landmark. I don't know how long it's been there. If you can see it over on the left side of the street, Paragon Sports. It's a huge sporting goods department store. It's like, I'd say it's like Tower Records used to be to records. Paragon Sports is to sporting goods. But the last time I was in there, it was looking a little thin, so you start to wonder whether even these iconic stores will always stay in business. But anyway, this is the area just north of Union Square Park. Checking my notes, this has to be 860 Broadway, which is right on Union Square on the north side. So this would be his third and final location of his studio in New York. I'm at Lexington and 34th, and this corner over here on the northwest corner is where Andy Warhol, one of the first places he lived, but I don't think it was this building. This building looked like it was built after the 40s, and there's no address, 242 Lexington, that faces Lexington, but it was at this corner anyway. So lucky Andy, he only lived in Manhattan when he moved to New York from Pittsburgh. Here's the townhouse, the first townhouse that Andy Warhol lived at 1342 Lexington at 89th Street, where you see the awning coming out. And he lived here from 1959 to 1974, 15 years, and then he moved down to closer to Midtown. But you think of him as a downtown guy, but he stayed mostly on the east side of Manhattan, and this is as far north as he got at 89th Street. Pretty nice. Finally, a plaque on a building. Something I'm looking at. Andy Warhol, 1928 to 1987. A pop artist best known for his silk screens of cultural icons including Jackie Kennedy, Marilyn Monroe, Chairman Mao, and Campbell soup cans. Lived here from 1974 to 1987. So, we are on a Tony block of the Upper East Side here on this street between Madison and Park Avenue. And Andy lived here until his death at New York Hospital for gallbladder surgery. So he wanted more space, and he also had his mother living with him, at least at one of the two townhouses, so he needed extra space for her too. This is it. So this is 57 East 66th Street between Madison and Park Avenue on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Finally, Andy had an estate way out on the eastern tip of Long Island in Montauk, and I don't know how often he used it, but he did loan it to Jackie Onassis and her sister to spend time with their families at one point. St. Patrick's Cathedral on 5th Avenue at 51st Street is where they held the memorial service for Andy Warhol. The Paramount Hotel on West 46th Street is where they held a luncheon reception after the memorial service for Andy Warhol at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And it's where John Cale and Lou Reed met and talked about producing a musical piece that would ultimately become Songs for Drella in memoriam of Andy Warhol. So it's a beautiful old hotel, and it has a restaurant area on the lower floors. This concludes a little summary of the places that Andy Warhol lived and worked in New York City. It's not meant to be an all-encompassing review of his life and his work. There's so many documentaries on YouTube and elsewhere that go into depth, but I was just curious as to the locations of the different places in Manhattan where he had his studios and where he lived, and also some of the places where he met and discovered musical groups like Blondie and the Velvet Underground. So thanks for joining me on this video. I hope you learned some things and satisfied some of your curiosity about this fascinating artist from the 20th century, Andy Warhol.